One of the most common arguments I hear for God's existence is that the universe seems so designed, so intrinsically fine-tuned for life, and life itself is even so complex. And the common argument is, if you see a watch, you know that there was a watchmaker. If you see a painting, you know that there was a painter. But is this really a good comparison? Does this argument really work? So first, let's address why everything seems so designed to humans. Like psychology-wise, why does it seem so designed? In his book, The God Delusion, Richard Dawkins talks about how humans assign intentionality and purpose to things. He talks about how humans assign purpose to things that seems purposeful to them. And this has arisen out of a Darwinian kind of evolution and natural selection, where this habit of assigning purpose to things, intentionality to things, has helped us survive in the past. So our ancestors might have looked at a big tiger in the grass and they would have thought, what is the intention of this creature? Is it that it might eat me, or is it that it's trying to talk to me? This kind of identifying purpose and intentionality was very useful to our ancestors in their survival. If they looked at a predator, they had to assign an intention to that predator, and they had to think, is this predator going to eat me? Is that its intention? And deciding that on a quick fly out of intuition helped us survive for a long time. But then soon we started assigning these things to abstract ideas and other things we saw in nature that were actually inanimate and didn't have any purpose or intention. So when we saw the weather, we assumed that there must be some kind of intention behind why it's thundering, why our house got struck with lightning, or why this forest got struck with lightning. We had to assign a kind of intention because that's what we do in order to survive. But little did we know, there was no intention behind any of these events. They were just natural events occurring around us. So this is one of the psychological reasons why we think that things have purpose, things have design or intentionality for a specific purpose or end goal, is because this was our psychology when we were evolving as a species. This helped us survive better. Now, just because things seem designed to us doesn't mean that they are. Intuitions are not always the most reliable way of attaining information or the truth. Our intuitions can be wrong a lot of times. And that is really what's happening with the teleological argument or design argument or watchmaker argument or any other name that you want to give it, is that we're using our intuition, our ancient evolved intuition that helped us survive, in a ill-informed way to make conclusions about the world. So we're concluding that because we're here and life is thriving so well, that this must have been designed for us. But again, we're drawing conclusions from our intuitions, which are most of the time not correct, as we will see as I go through the rebuttal of this argument. So let's first start with the most common version of this, the watchmaker analogy. The argument goes like, if you see a watch laying on the ground, you wouldn't think that it just assembled itself together. It was a natural process. You would know that it has a designer. It has a intentional being that designed it for it to be that way, for that end goal. And the thing we miss with this analogy a lot of times, and the same thing with the painter analogy, where you see a painting, there must be a painter, there's a watchmaker, there's a car maker, there's anything, right? Is these are human designed things, right? We're associating human designed things that are clearly designed by us, that you can see that they're designed by us. We're comparing that to the universe. Now, until we find evidence of design in the universe that can't be explained any other way by any other natural phenomenon except that it was designed by intentionality by a being, this argument doesn't work. Because when we see a watch, we know it's designed because we have experience of a human designing it. We know people design these things. We can go watch someone, we can watch a video, we can go watch someone in a factory make a watch. Right? This is a real thing. But this analogy doesn't work with the universe because we've never seen any design in the universe. We've never seen this happening. We've never seen any intervention in the universe, like a watchmaker might come and open a watch and fix things in the watch. The universe is just is. It just is the way it is. So what I would say to the watchmaker argument is that a watch is clearly designed. A painting is clearly painted because we've seen people. There's evidence that this is designed. We can watch it get designed. But this is not the same thing with the universe. You can't look at the universe being designed. You have no evidence that the universe has had intentional wiring and adjustments done to it like a watchmaker might make to a watch. And a lot of the time the universe does seem designed to us because we just don't have enough knowledge of how natural things work. So as someone who studies biology and planning to be a biology major in the future, I can explain a fair amount why there seems to be design in biological processes inside in life and how life seems so complex. And I can explain the processes that allow for these things to become so complex. There are simple processes that throughout time start building more complex systems. Now, I would love to explain evolution in biology. Maybe that would be for another channel or other kinds of videos that I would make. But for now, I'm just going to link you guys to some videos that I found of Forrest Valkai, which is a really good teacher on biology and evolution. And he can explain a lot of things. There's also videos of Richard Dawkins explaining things. There's a lot of videos that I will link in the description that you can look at, and they will really open up your mind. They will really explain how the things that we see as so complex that there's no way these things could have come naturally. They will explain how these things come about naturally from a simplified form through very simple modifications throughout time and throughout the generations, throughout the population, which ends up creating a very complex system. But for now, we're going to be talking about the teleological argument, or the argument from design, and a lot of flaws with it. So when we're speaking about life in the universe, we think that the universe was designed for life to prosper, right? For life to thrive. But this is just looking at the argument in the wrong direction. It's not really that the universe was designed for life to thrive and begin. It's that life adapted and began based on what the universe had established already. So we are evolved to adapt to this environment that we're in right now. There's also another view on the universal aspect of how physics was designed and how the values for physics are fine-tuned for things to work just right. But I think there's a huge assumption here that we're assuming that these constants could be different. There is a possibility for them to be different when we have no reason to believe that. It might just be that these constants are the way they are because they are this way. They have to be this way out of necessity. I think a really good passage in The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins is when he's talking about the teleological argument, and when he's talking about the knobs that you could turn to change the constants and how God would turn those knobs to change the constants in the universe. He says, hard-nosed physicists say that the 6 knobs were never free to vary in the first place. When we finally reach the long-hoped-for theory of everything, we shall see that the 6 key numbers depend upon each other or on something else yet unknown, in ways that we cannot imagine today. The 6 numbers may turn out to be no freer to vary in the ratio of a circle's circumference to this diameter. It will turn out that there is only one way for the universe to be. Far from God needed to twiddle 6 knobs, that there was no knobs to twiddle. And I think that's a big thing with this argument. It's just, people can't say, I don't know, we don't know. We don't know why these constants are like this, right? We just are not emotionally satisfied with that answer. We're not emotionally satisfied. We're saying, I don't know. Maybe we need more time to figure this out, right? We need an answer. We need an answer right now. Okay, God did it. Again, it's a God of the gaps kind of fallacy where you just need to fill in a hole in your knowledge and you just put God there. But instead of saying that, oh, maybe there's a process that we don't understand yet. Oh, maybe these constants have a reason for being like this that we just haven't gotten progressed enough in science to understand. I think the core of this teleological design argument comes from just people not being able to say, I don't know. And it's every time that this gap has been presented and filled in with God, it has been closed. Every single time we've seen examples of this. A lot of people say, oh, scientists have faith that these gaps will be closed in the future. You have faith that you will find the answers. But it's really not faith. It's based on historical evidence of how these things have happened in the past. So in the past, people would say, oh, God controls the weather. That's why there's lightning. That's why there's sunshine. And we started doing studies on the weather. We started studying the weather and we found out these are completely natural processes. There's no intention in them. And then the biggest one happened with evolution and Charles Darwin when he discovered that this design, this complexity can come through very natural processes, which was a very revolutionary thing that humans hadn't thought of before. And this was a huge blow to the God argument, to the support for God. That's why the church wanted him to change his final passages of saying, the Creator did this, the Creator designed it this way. Thankfully, he changed it back to the original after they gave up on being so insistent on putting the Creator in there. But these things have happened throughout history so many times. It's just been, we don't know how the weather works? God. We don't know why there's design in life? God. We don't know why volcanoes go off? God. We don't know why disease happens? God. And all these gaps have been getting filled, so God has just been getting pushed further and further and further and back. And now that we're so advanced in our scientific knowledge, it goes back to whatever else there's a gap. So now it's in the cause of the universe, the constants, how life began, which we have a kind of actually good answer for, which I'll get into later. And it's just a matter of time based on historical evidence that these gaps of knowledge will be filled. And if they're not, then we say, I don't know. Because there's no support for the God answer, right? And also, it's not that science is just trying to be difficult with the religion here and refute everything they're saying just by saying something. Science is genuinely trying to get down to the truth here. So for the question of how life began, scientists used to say that there was something called spontaneous generation of life. So if you've left a bag of rice out, the rice grains would just spontaneously generate mice and mouse and rats out of them, because we thought that the rice grains turn into mice. Or that flies just generated out of meat sitting around, right? But then we did experiments on this, like Francisco Redi's experiment on spontaneous generation of flies and meat. He left multiple jars out and put meat in each of them and experimented to see which meat would generate flies, the ones that were covered, the ones that had a filter on them, or the ones that were completely open. And lo and behold, the ones that were completely open generated flies, because the flies would come in, lay eggs, and the maggots would grow up and become flies and leave the meat. And immediately after that experiment, spontaneous generation was thrown out as a theory of how life generated. And that was a theory that didn't involve any God, it was just spontaneous generation. And that theory was thrown out immediately. So science is trying to find the truth here. We're not trying to be difficult here. Now, the most supported theory right now is a theory called abiogenesis. Abiogenesis is the formation of inorganic molecules like elements and atoms that form together and form molecules and proteins and DNA, which is the supporting blocks of life. So one of the experiments that was actually tested in a lab was the Miller-Urey example of 1952. And that experiment has been demonstrated over and over again repeatedly to be able to produce amino acids with just inorganic compounds and the right conditions. I would recommend everyone do a little bit of research on this topic, because these experiments can really show us that it's possible for inorganic compounds to form organic compounds like DNA and RNA, which are the building blocks of life. Now, many people may say that the chance of these molecules forming from inorganic compounds, it's so low, it's so incredibly low, that it would be next to impossible for this to happen and generate life on Earth. But to that, I would say, what other explanation is there that can actually give us a statistical probability of this happening? So let's say the other explanation is that God started life on Earth. How can we in any way demonstrate that is true? How in any way can we know that there's an actual statistical probability that God started life on Earth? Like, at least for abiogenesis, if we have a small, tiny chance, right? It's still there. It's very tiny, but it's still an existing chance that it might happen. For the God explanation, we have nothing. You just say that God created it, and we just have to go along with it with no statistical probability, with no explanation of how it might have happened. And to me, at least, I think an explanation that has a very small chance of happening is still better than an explanation that has no provided chance of happening. So when you're talking about God creating life, you have no statement stating that this is the chance of that happening. There's really no supporting evidence. There's nothing for that explanation. And a lot of people that believe in God want to talk about how atheists believe that everything came out of nothing, but that's really not the atheist viewpoint. At least for the Big Bang, there's actually a consensus that all the molecules existed before the Big Bang, and the Big Bang was just an event initiated this expansion of these molecules and all these reactions. But really, the ones that are saying that stuff came out of nothing is the people who believe in God. They believe that God spoke into existence these molecules, spoke into existence the heavens and the earth out of nothing. And I would think that is definitely a lot harder to defend than the fact that, oh, these molecules might have just existed before that, and there was an event that ended up expanding them. And then the biggest objection I have to this whole argument is that we say, oh, the universe is so complex, there's so much design in the universe, there must be a designer for that. Okay, let's grant that your argument makes sense and there's actually a designer for that. So the premise of your argument is that complex things have to have a designer that is more complex than them. So if we're using this logic, the logic of the argument that you're using, why can't we use that with God? You would think that since God created all these complex things, that he himself must be so much more complex than all these things he's created. But then that would beg the question of who designed God? We have to keep the logic here consistent. If you're going to make an argument, you're going to have to keep the logic consistent on how things come about. And if you're going to say complex things must be designed, then that means that the designer must be very complex. So then who designed the designer? And yeah, you could use the special pleading fallacy and say that, oh, God, it just is. He just is always there, was always there. He didn't need a designer. But until you provide a reason for that argument is just fallacious and invalid. But yeah, that's pretty much my rebuttal for this argument. I think it really just comes down to us to be humble and say, I don't know, we don't have the knowledge right now. As nice as it might be to fill in those gaps of knowledge with God and say that God did it, it's not the truth because it can't be backed up in any way. So this argument is just, at the end of the day, just a God at the gaps fallacy of, we don't know how these things could happen, so it must mean saying that God did it. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, comment below if you have any thoughts, let's have some discussions on this, and subscribe if you like this content, and thank you so much for watching this video.